The healer's door slammed shut with such force that rain spattered back from the wood onto Kargha's face, mixing with the tears she had been too proud to shed until now. She stood there in the downpour, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other still raised from knocking, and felt the last thread of hope snap inside her chest. Behind that door, she had heard the healer's voice, sharp and final. "I don't tend to monsters, especially not ones carrying more of their kind." Thunder rolled across the valley as Kargha turned away from the cottage, her legs trembling beneath her weight. She had walked for 3 days to reach this village, following rumors of a healer skilled enough to handle complicated births. Her own clan had cast her out when they discovered the father was human, a traitor who had promised her the world and then disappeared like smoke when she told him about the child. The orc clans had no patience for half-breeds or the mothers who bore them. The human settlements had no mercy for orcs, regardless of circumstance. The rain came down harder, turning the village road into a river of mud that sucked at her boots. Kargha's vision blurred, whether from rain or exhaustion she could no longer tell. Her contractions had started that morning, still far apart but growing stronger. She knew enough about birthing to understand she had perhaps a day, maybe less. The baby was positioned wrong. She had felt it shift weeks ago into a presentation that would kill them both without help. She stumbled, catching herself against a fence post, and stayed there gasping. The village around her was shuttered tight against the storm, but she could feel eyes watching from behind curtains, could sense the fear and disgust radiating from those warm, dry homes. A pregnant orc alone in their village was either a threat or an omen, and neither would earn her aid. "Please," she whispered to no one, to the storm, to any god that might listen. "Please, not like this." Her knees buckled and she went down hard into the mud. The impact sent a sharp pain through her belly that made her cry out. She tried to push herself up, but her arms had no strength left. 3 days without real food, sleeping in ditches and hollow trees, fleeing from stones thrown by children and dogs set on her by farmers. She had nothing left to give. The mud was cold against her cheek. At least the rain washed it clean, she thought dimly. At least she would not die dirty. Then hands were on her, strong and careful, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. Kargha tried to focus on the face above her, but saw only a dark shape haloed by rain, a human man with broad shoulders and a jaw set with determination. "I have you," he said, and his voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who had carried wounded before and knew how to do it without causing more pain. "Stay with me now." Kargha wanted to tell him to leave her, that helping an orc would only bring him trouble, but the words would not come. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he turned and began walking, not toward the healer's cottage but in the opposite direction, toward the edge of the village where the houses grew sparse and the forest began its reclamation of the land. She drifted in and out of awareness. At some point they were no longer in the rain. She heard a door close, felt herself being lowered onto something soft. Firelight flickered orange against her closed eyelids and warmth began to seep into her frozen limbs. "Can you hear me?" the voice asked, closer now, and she forced her eyes open. The man kneeling beside her was perhaps 30, with brown hair darkened by rain and eyes the color of winter moss. His face was weathered in the way of men who worked outdoors, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into sun and wind. There was a scar along his jaw, old and pale, and his hands where they rested on his knees were calloused and strong. "You are in my home," he said when he saw her focusing on him. "You are safe here. My name is Thomas Carver." Kargha's throat was so dry the words came out as a croak. "Why?" Thomas's expression did not change, but something moved in his eyes, something that might have been old pain or old anger. Because it was the right thing to do, he said simply. Can you tell me your name, Kargha? She tried to sit up and gasped as another contraction seized her belly. It was stronger this time, lasting longer, and when it passed, she was shaking. The baby. Something is wrong with the baby. Thomas's jaw tightened. The healer refused you. It was not a question, but Kargha nodded anyway. He would not even open the door once he saw what I was. Elric Thorne is a coward and a fool, Thomas said, and there was steel in his voice now. And he calls himself a man of healing. He was quiet for a moment, thinking, then seemed to come to a decision. I served as a field medic during the border wars. I have delivered babies before, though I will tell you plainly, I am not skilled in complicated births. But I will do everything I can. Kargha stared at him. A human soldier, a veteran of the wars where humans and orcs had slaughtered each other over disputed territory and old hatreds. He should have left her in the mud. He should have been the first to throw stones. Instead, he had carried her to his home and was offering to help birth a child that was half orc, half human, belonging fully to neither world. Why? She asked again, because nothing made sense anymore. Thomas met her eyes and she saw something there that surprised her. Recognition. Not of her specifically, but of the situation, of desperate need met with closed doors and hard hearts. I was wounded once, he said quietly, during the war, left behind when my unit retreated. An orc woman found me and could have cut my throat. Instead, she bound my wounds and gave me water and hid me from the war parties that came through. When I asked her why, she said that killing was for the battlefield, not for the moments after when a person was trying to stay alive. He paused. I never learned her name, but I have never forgotten what she did. Perhaps this is my chance to pay that debt. Kargha felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time they were not from despair. I do not know if we will survive this. Then we will try our damnedest to make sure you do, Thomas said, and there was a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Now, I need to examine you and understand what is happening. This will not be comfortable, but I need you to trust me. Trust. Such a strange word to hear from a human. But Kargha found herself nodding, because what other choice did she have? And because there was something in Thomas Carver's steady gaze that made her want to believe him. The examination was painful and humiliating, but Thomas worked with swift efficiency, his touch clinical and careful. When he finished, his expression was grave. The baby is breech, he said. Feet first instead of head first, and positioned sideways as well. In a normal birth, this would be dangerous. For a half-orc child, potentially larger than a human baby, it could be fatal for both of you. Kargha already knew this, had felt it in the wrongness of the baby's position for weeks, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that hollowed her out. Then we are both dead. Not yet, Thomas said firmly. There is a procedure. Dangerous, painful, but possible. I would need to reach inside and try to turn the baby, reposition it so the head comes first. I have done it twice before, once successfully, once not. I will not lie to you about the odds. And if you do nothing, you will die, probably within the next 12 hours. The baby will die with you, or shortly after if by some miracle it is born alive in its current position. Kargha closed her eyes. She thought of her clan, who had exiled her with curses and stones. She thought of the traitor with his silver words and empty promises. She thought of the healer who had slammed his door in her face. And then she thought of the orc woman she had never met, who had shown mercy to a wounded enemy soldier and asked for nothing in return. Do it, she said. Thomas nodded once, then stood and began moving around the cottage with purpose. It was a simple dwelling, one large room with a sleeping area partitioned by a curtain, a hearth, a table and chairs, shelves lined with simple dishes and supplies. He built up the fire until it roared, filling the space with warmth and light. He heated water, gathered clean cloths, laid out tools that gleamed in the firelight and made Kargha's stomach clench with fear. "This is going to hurt," he warned as he returned to her side. "I need you to stay as still as possible, no matter what you feel. If you thrash, I could injure you or the baby." "Do you understand?" Kargha nodded, not trusting her voice. Thomas positioned her carefully, explaining each step as he went, and then he began. The pain was unlike anything Kargha had experienced. It was not the sharp agony of a wound or the dull ache of exhaustion, but something deeper and more fundamental, a violation of her body's most basic spaces. She bit down on the leather strap Thomas had given her and tasted blood from where her tusks cut into her lip. Sweat poured down her face. She focused on the rafters above her, counting the beams over and over, anything to stay present and still. Thomas's hands were steady despite the difficulty of the work. He spoke as he worked, his voice low and constant, telling her what he was feeling, what he was trying to do. "There is the foot. I have it now. Going to try to fold it back. The baby is strong, fighting me. That is good. That means it wants to live. Almost there. Just a bit more." Time lost meaning. There was only the pain in Thomas's voice and the desperate need to stay still. Then, abruptly, something shifted inside her, a sensation of movement and change, and Thomas let out a breath. "Got it," he said, and his voice was tight with relief. "The baby is turned. Head down, proper position. Now we wait for labor to progress naturally." He withdrew his hands and immediately began cleaning her, his touch gentle now, wiping away blood and fluid with warm cloths. Kargha lay there trembling, the leather strap falling from her mouth. She felt hollowed out, exhausted beyond measure, but beneath that was a tiny flutter of hope. "You did well," Thomas said, and there was approval in his voice. "You are stronger than most soldiers I served with. Now drink this." He held a cup to her lips, and she drank without question. The liquid was bitter with herbs but warm, and it spread through her like a blessing. The pain receded to a manageable level, and her trembling eased. "What was that?" she asked. "Willow bark and a few other things." "For the pain and to help prevent infection. It will not stop the contractions, but it should make them bearable." He set the cup aside and pulled a blanket over her. "Now you need to rest between contractions. Labor could last hours or a full day. You will need your strength." Kargha wanted to argue that she could not possibly rest, but her body had other ideas. The warmth of the fire, the softness of the bed beneath her, the release of tension now that the baby was positioned correctly, all of it combined to pull her down into a doze despite the circumstances. She woke to another contraction, stronger now, and found Thomas sitting nearby, mending something by the firelight. He set his work aside immediately and came to her, timing the contraction with a practiced eye. "Good," he said when it passed. "They are coming more regularly now. It will not be much longer." The pattern repeated. Kargha would doze, then wake to pain, and each time Thomas was there, steady and calm, helping her through it. He gave her water when she could drink, wiped her face with cool cloths, checked the baby's progress with gentle efficiency. As the hours passed and the contractions grew stronger and closer together, he helped her into different positions, supporting her weight when she needed to stand and sway, bracing her when she needed to squat. The storm outside had passed, and gray dawn light was filtering through the windows when the urge to push finally came, overwhelming and undeniable. Thomas positioned himself where he could guide the baby, his hands ready. "Listen to your body," he said. "Push when it tells you to push, rest when it tells you to rest. I am here." Kargha pushed, and the pain was enormous but different now, purposeful. She could feel the baby moving, descending, and that gave her strength. Thomas's voice was a constant anchor, telling her she was doing well, that the head was crowning just a little more, almost there. Then the baby was out in a rush of fluid and relief, and Thomas was lifting it, clearing its mouth and nose, and the first cry rang through the cottage, strong and indignant. "A girl," Thomas said, and his voice was full of wonder. "You have a daughter." He laid the baby on Kargha's chest, still attached by the cord, and Kargha looked down at the tiny creature crying against her skin. The baby was small but perfect, with skin that was a lighter green than Kargha's own, tiny tusks barely visible in her mouth, ears that were pointed but not as dramatically as a full orc's. Her hair was dark and thick, and when she opened her eyes they were a startling amber color. "She is beautiful," Kargha whispered, and the tears that fell now were pure joy. Thomas worked quickly to deliver the afterbirth and tie off the cord, his movements sure despite the emotion Kargha could see in his face. When everything was finished and both mother and baby were cleaned and settled, he sat back with a long exhale. "You both made it," he said, as if he had not quite believed it would happen. "You are going to be all right." Kargha looked up at him, this stranger who had saved her life and her daughter's life, who had shown more kindness in one night than she had received from her own people in months. "Thank you," she said, and the words were pitifully inadequate for what she felt. "Thank you, Thomas Carver." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "You are welcome, Kargha. Now rest. You have earned it." The days that followed took on a strange, quiet rhythm. Kargha was weak from the birth and needed time to recover, so Thomas insisted she stay. He moved his own bedding to the floor by the fire and gave her the bed, would not hear any arguments about it. He cooked simple meals of porridge and stew and bread, brought her water and tea, changed the bandages and checked for signs of infection or fever. The baby, whom Kargha named Maka after her own mother, proved to have a strong appetite and lungs to match. Thomas carved a cradle from a wooden chest, lined it with soft cloths, and set it beside the bed so Kargha could reach her daughter easily. He proved surprisingly adept at soothing the baby when she fussed, walking the floor with her tucked against his shoulder, humming old soldiers' songs under his breath. On the third day, when Kargha was strong enough to sit up for longer periods, she watched Thomas working at the table, carving something from a piece of wood. The cottage was warm and peaceful, with afternoon light streaming through the windows. It felt surreal, this domesticity, this safety. "You live alone," Kargha said. It was not a question, but Thomas nodded anyway. "I do. I came to this village 5 years ago after the war ended, bought this land and built this cottage with my own hands." He turned the piece of wood, studying it. "It is a quiet life, I like it that way." "No family," his hands stilled for a moment. "I had a wife. She died of fever the winter before the war started. We never had children." He resumed his carving, his voice carefully neutral. "I have a brother in the capital, but we have not spoken in years. He did not approve of my choices." Kargha heard the pain beneath the words, old and familiar. "What choices?" Thomas glanced at her, considering, then set down his carving. "I refused to go back to soldiering after my injury healed. My brother thought I was a coward, that I had abandoned my duty. But I had seen enough killing, enough hate. I wanted no more part of it." He looked at the cradle where Maka slept. "The things we did during that war on both sides. We told ourselves it was necessary, that the enemy was not truly people. But after that orc woman saved me, I could not make myself believe it any more." "That must have been difficult," Kargha said softly. "It was, but it was also right." Thomas picked up his carving again, a small wooden rattle taking shape in his hands. "When I came here, I thought I would leave all of that behind, make a simple life and forget. But you cannot forget. You can only try to do better going forward." Maka stirred and made a small sound, and Kargha reached to rock the cradle. The baby settled again, her tiny hand curled into a fist by her mouth. Looking at her daughter, Kargha felt the full weight of her situation settle back onto her shoulders. "I cannot stay here forever," she said. "Already you have done too much. The village must be talking." Thomas snorted. "Let them talk. They have always found reasons to gossip about me. The recluse, the broken soldier, the man who keeps to himself. One more thing will not matter. It will matter if they come here, if they decide an orc in their village is too much of a threat." Kargha met his eyes. "You could be hurt because of me. Your home could be burned." "It could," Thomas agreed. "But I do not think it will come to that. The village is small, and most of the people here are more interested in their own concerns than in bothering with us. As long as we do not flaunt your presence, they will likely ignore it. And when Maka grows, when she needs to go outside to learn and play in live," Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I have been thinking about that," he admitted. "You are right that this situation cannot last indefinitely. But you are also in no condition to travel yet, and Maka is too young, so for now stay, heal. Let yourself and your daughter grow stronger. When the time comes to make decisions about the future, we will make them together." Together. The word hung in the air between them, strange and warm. Kargha did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, but something in her chest loosened just a little. The weeks passed, and spring began to give way to early summer. Kargha healed, her strength returning day by day. Maka grew at what seemed an impossible rate, her eyes tracking movement, her hands reaching for things, her cries becoming more varied and communicative. And Thomas continued his quiet kindness, sharing his home and food and time as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Kargha found herself drawn into the rhythms of his life. She helped with cooking when she was able, mended his clothes, tidied the cottage. Thomas worked a small plot of land behind the cottage, growing vegetables and herbs. And as she grew stronger, Kargha began to help with that as well, though she stayed carefully out of sight of the village proper. They talked during the long evenings, feeding the conversation with small pieces of their lives. Thomas spoke of his childhood on a farm in the southern provinces, of learning medicine from an old healer who traveled with the army. Kargha told him of growing up in the Iron Peak clan, of learning to hunt and track, of the stories the elders told about the days before the wars when orcs and humans had traded peacefully along the border. "What happened to those days?" Thomas asked one evening. They were sitting outside the cottage, watching the sun set over the forest. Maka was asleep in Kargha's arms, swaddled against the cooling air. Kargha was quiet, thinking. Greed, maybe. Fear. Some humans wanted orc lands. Some orcs wanted human goods. And when the first blood was spilled, it became easier to spill more than to stop and talk. She looked down at her daughter. "The elders say there were mixed marriages once, human and orc families living on the borders, but the war killed that. Now both sides see it as betrayal." "Not everyone," Thomas said. When Kargha looked at him, he was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Some of us remember that hate is taught, not born. Some of us know the difference between an enemy soldier and a person who needs help." Their eyes held for a moment, and Kargha felt something shift between them, subtle but unmistakable. She looked away first, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how natural it had become to share this space with him. "I should put Maka to bed," she said, standing perhaps too quickly. Thomas nodded, his face unreadable now. "Of course. I will bank the fire." Inside, as Kargha settled Maka into the cradle and listened to Thomas moving around the cottage, she found her thoughts in turmoil. She had been so focused on survival, on healing, on caring for her daughter, that she had not let herself think about what was growing between her and Thomas. But it was there, undeniable now that she had noticed it, in the way he smiled when Macker reached for him, in the way their hands brushed when passing dishes at meals, in the comfortable silences that stretched between them like warm blankets. It was impossible, of course. She was an orc, exiled by her people. He was a human, already suspect in his own village. A relationship between them would be more than scandal. It would be dangerous for them both. And yet she found herself thinking about it anyway, late at night when she could not sleep, listening to Thomas's breathing from across the room and wondering what he was thinking. The issue came to a head on a market day in early summer. Thomas went to the village as he did every few weeks to trade vegetables for supplies they needed. He was gone longer than usual, and when he returned his face was set in hard lines. What happened? Kargha asked immediately, reading the tension in his shoulders. Thomas set down his pack with more force than necessary. The healer died. 3 days ago, apparently. Fever took him quickly. He began unpacking supplies, his movements sharp. And now the village is in a panic because there is no healer within 2 days' travel. Margaret Cooper's son fell from a barn roof this morning, and they have no one to set his broken arm properly. Kargha felt a chill run through her. Thomas, no, you cannot. Cannot what? He turned to her, and there was fire in his eyes now. Help a boy who is in pain. I may not have fancy titles or a healer's license, but I know how to set a broken bone. If you help them, they will ask questions. They will want to know how you learned medicine. Some of them will remember you brought supplies for a birth. They will start to think, to wonder. Let them wonder. Thomas's jaw was set. I am not going to let a boy suffer because people might gossip. It is not just gossip I am worried about, Kargha said, and she could hear the fear in her own voice. Thomas, if they realize I am here, if they connect you helping that boy with the night you refused to let the storm stop you from going out, they could come here. They could hurt you, burn your home, take Makkah. You have to think about this. Thomas's expression softened slightly. He crossed to her and took her hands in his, and the touch sent warmth up her arms. Kargha, I know you are scared, I understand. But I cannot become like the healer who turned you away. I cannot close my door on someone who needs help, especially not a child. That is not who I want to be. Kargha looked up at him, at his weathered face and steady eyes, and felt her arguments crumble, because he was right. If he turned away from helping that boy, he would be doing the same thing that had nearly killed her and Makkah. And she could not ask him to become that person, even for her safety. Then I will pack our things, she said quietly. If they come here afterward, we will already be gone. You will be safe. Thomas's hands tightened on hers. I do not want you to leave. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Kargha's breath caught. Thomas, I know it is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this is foolish. But I need you to know that I do not want you to leave. Not now, not because of this, not at all. He took a breath, and she could see him gathering courage. These past weeks, having you and Makkah here, it has felt like a home again, like I am living instead of just existing. And I hope that maybe you feel something similar. Kargha's heart was pounding. She should deny it, should protect them both from this impossibility, but she found herself nodding instead, the truth pulling itself free. I do. I feel it too, but Thomas, we cannot. The world will not allow it. Then we will change what the world allows, Thomas said, and there was fierce determination in his voice. Or we will find a place where the world cannot reach us, but I am not giving up on this without trying. Are you? Kargha thought of her daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, safe and wanted. She thought of the kindness Thomas had shown, day after day, asking nothing in return. She thought of how long it had been since she had felt at home anywhere with anyone. and she thought of the orc woman who had saved a wounded enemy who had chosen mercy over hate. "No," she said, "I am not giving up either." Thomas smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then he leaned down and kissed her, gentle and questioning, and Kargha rose on her toes to meet him, answering yes, yes, yes with the touch of her lips. When they broke apart, both of them slightly breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I need to go help that boy," he said. "But when I come back, we are going to figure this out. Together." "Together," Kargha agreed, and the word felt like a promise. Thomas gathered his medical supplies and left for the village. Kargha spent the time he was gone alternating between hope and terror, playing with Macca to distract herself from imagining all the ways this could go wrong. But when Thomas returned several hours later, he was alone and unharmed, if a bit weary. "It went well," he reported, accepting the cup of tea Kargha pressed into his hands. "The break was clean, easy to set. The boy will be fine." His mother was grateful enough that she did not ask too many questions about where I learned medicine. A few of the others were more curious, but I simply said I picked up some skills during the war. No one suspected. If they did not voice it, though I did hear some interesting news. Thomas took a sip of tea, his expression thoughtful. "Apparently there is a new settlement being established in the Northern Territories, past the border. A place where the war did not reach as hard, where people are trying to build something new. They are actively seeking settlers, offering land to anyone willing to work it." Kargha's pulse quickened. "How far north?" 3 weeks' travel, maybe a month with a baby, through the forest, not along the main roads. Thomas met her eyes. "It is supposed to be more open-minded there. The war was less intense in that region, so there is less bad blood between orcs and humans. People are more concerned with surviving the wilderness than with old hatreds. You are thinking we could go there. I am thinking it might be an option, if we wanted to pursue it." Thomas set down his tea and reached for her hand. "I am not saying we have to decide now. But it is something to consider. A place where Macca could grow up without hiding what she is, where we could build a life together without fear." Kargha's mind was racing. The Northern Territories were wild and dangerous, but they were also far from the reaches of both human and orc authorities. A fresh start, a new beginning in a place where perhaps their love would be less impossible. "I need to think about it," she said. "But yes, it is something to consider." Over the following weeks, the idea took root and grew. Thomas made careful inquiries during his trips to the village, gathering information about the northern settlement without revealing why he was interested. The more they learned, the more viable it seemed. The settlement was called Rivermeet, situated at the confluence of 2 rivers in a fertile valley. It was governed by a council that reportedly included both humans and orcs, focused on practical matters rather than ancient grudges. They needed farmers, hunters, builders, skills that both Thomas and Kargha possessed. But leaving meant giving up Thomas's home, the land he had worked for years, the small security he had built. And it meant a dangerous journey through wilderness with a baby. The decision weighed on both of them. The choice was made for them on a hot afternoon in late summer. Kargha was inside the cottage with Macca while Thomas worked in the garden when she heard angry voices approaching. She moved to the window and felt her blood turn to ice. 5 men from the village were walking up the path toward the cottage, and they did not look friendly. Kargha scooped up Macca and retreated to the sleeping area, drawing the curtain. Her mind raced through possibilities. If they searched the cottage, they would find her immediately. If she tried to run out the back, they would see her. Her only hope was that Thomas could turn them away before they came inside. Through the walls, she heard Thomas's voice, steady and questioning. "Gentlemen, what brings you all the way out here? Curiosity Carver." That was Morris Wright, a farmer who had never liked Thomas. "See, we have been putting some things together. The night that pregnant orc came through during the storm, you were seen heading toward the healer's place. The next morning, you had the look of a man who had been up all night. And then a few weeks later, you suddenly have medical skills none of us knew about." "I was a medic in the war," Thomas said calmly. "I have always had medical skills. I simply did not advertise them." "Maybe so," another voice said, one Kargha did not recognize. "But we also noticed you have been buying extra food lately, more than one man would need, and sometimes there is smoke from your chimney at odd hours, like someone is cooking throughout the day." "I like to eat well," Thomas said, but there was tension in his voice now. "Is that a crime?" "Stop playing games, Carver," Morris again, aggressive now. "We know you are hiding something. The question is whether you are going to let us look around your cottage peacefully or if we are going to have to insist." Karga's heart hammered against her ribs. Maka, sensing her mother's fear, began to fuss. Kargha pressed the baby against her shoulder, swaying and humming desperately, begging silently for her daughter to stay quiet. But Maka's fussing escalated into a cry, high and unmistakable in the tense silence. "What was that?" one of the men demanded. There was a moment of terrible silence. Then Thomas said, "You want to see inside? Fine. But you leave your weapons out here. I will not have armed men in my home." Kargha heard the sound of knives and a cudgel being set down. Then the door opened and footsteps entered the cottage. She stood behind the curtain, Maka crying in her arms, and knew it was over. All she could hope for now was that they would take their anger out on her and spare Thomas and the baby. The curtain was yanked back, and Morris Wright stood there with triumph on his face. Well, what do we have here?" The other four men crowded behind him, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust to fear. Kargha lifted her chin, holding Maka close, and met their eyes without flinching. Let them see she was not ashamed. "That is an orc," one of the men breathed. "Carver, have you lost your mind? You are harboring an orc and its spawn." "She is a woman who needed help," Thomas said, and he had moved to stand between Kargha and the men, his body language protective. "And the child is an infant who has done nothing to anyone. They are not a threat to you or the village." "Not a threat," Morris laughed harshly. "It is an orc, Carver. They are all threats. And that baby is going to grow up to be just like its mother, violent and savage. You have put us all in danger by keeping them here." "The only danger here is the violence you are suggesting," Thomas shot back. "Kargha and her daughter have been here for months, peacefully, bothering no one. The only reason you even know about them is because you came here looking for trouble." "We came here because we suspected you were up to something, and we were right." Morris jabbed a finger toward Kargha. "That thing needs to be driven off, back to whatever orc hole it came from. And if you try to stop us, Carver, we will consider you an orc lover and drive you off too." Kargha saw Thomas's hands curl into fists. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, about to spill over into violence. She had to do something before Thomas got himself killed trying to protect her. "Wait," she said, and her voice cut through the tension. All eyes turned to her. "I will leave. You are right that I do not belong here. Thomas Carver was kind enough to help me when I needed it, but I was always going to move on. I will pack my things and be gone within the hour. There is no need for anyone to be hurt." "No," Thomas said immediately, turning to her. "Kargha, you do not have to." "Yes, I do," she said, meeting his eyes, trying to communicate something beneath the words. "These men are right. I have imposed on your hospitality long enough. It is time for me to go." Thomas stared at her, and she saw understanding slowly dawn. She was not giving up. She was buying them time, preventing a fight that Thomas could not win. "Fine," Morris said with satisfaction. "You have until sunset. We will wait outside to make sure you actually leave. And Carver, If we ever see that creature around here again, your cottage will burn to the ground. Understand?" Thomas's jaw was tight, but he nodded. The men filed back outside, and Kargha heard them settling on the porch, talking amongst themselves. She and Thomas stood looking at each other across the small space of the cottage. "What are we going to do?" Thomas asked quietly. "We are going north," Kargha said, "to Rivermeet. There is nothing for us here anymore. Start packing the things you cannot leave behind, only what we can carry." They moved into swift action. Thomas packed medical supplies, tools, what food would keep for travel. Kargha bundled Macca into a sling against her chest and gathered the few possessions she had, along with extra cloths and supplies for the baby. They worked mostly in silence, years of experience teaching them both how to pack for hard travel. When they were ready, Thomas took one last look around the cottage he had built with his own hands. Kargha saw grief in his face and felt guilt twist in her gut. He was giving up everything for her, for a relationship that might not even survive the journey north. "I am sorry," she said quietly. Thomas turned to her and cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "I am not. I would rather have an uncertain future with you than a lonely but safe one without you. That cottage was just wood and stone. This," he gestured between them, "this is real." Then he kissed her, deep and claiming, a promise and a commitment. When they broke apart, Kargha felt steadier. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They walked out of the cottage with their packs on their backs and Macca sleeping against Kargha's chest. The 5 men watched from the porch, Morris with his arms crossed. "What do you think you are doing, Carver?" Morris demanded when he saw Thomas's pack. "Leaving," Thomas said flatly. "You made it clear I am not welcome here if I refuse to throw a mother and baby out to die, so I am choosing to go with them." "You are serious," one of the other men said, sounding shocked. "You are going to throw away everything you have built here for an orc." "I am going to choose basic human decency over cowardice," Thomas corrected. "Something you might consider trying." Morris's face darkened. "You will regret this, Carver." "The only thing I regret is not leaving this narrow-minded place sooner," Thomas said. Then he turned his back on them and started walking, Kargha at his side. They did not look back. The journey north was hard but not impossible. Thomas's military experience and Kargha's orc stamina and hunting skills complemented each other. They traveled mostly through forest and along small game trails, avoiding settlements and main roads where they might encounter trouble. Thomas showed Kargha how to move through human territories unnoticed, while Kargha taught Thomas tracking skills and which plants were safe to eat. Macca proved to be a remarkably good traveler for an infant. She seemed content as long as she was fed and held, and both Thomas and Kargha took turns carrying her. In the evenings, when they made camp, Thomas would hold the baby while Kargha prepared their meal, and Kargha would watch the two of them together and feel something warm and powerful expanding in her chest. They were a family, cobbled together from exile and mercy and choice, but a family nonetheless. 3 weeks into the journey, they had a scare when they encountered an orc war party. Kargha managed to talk their way out of trouble, but it was close. The orcs were deeply suspicious of Thomas and disgusted by Macca's mixed heritage. Only Kargha's status as a former member of the Iron Peak clan, known for producing fierce warriors, earned them enough respect to be sent on their way with warnings rather than violence. After that encounter, Thomas was quiet for a long time. That evening, as they sat by their small fire, he finally spoke. "You regret it. Macca, I mean. The fact that she is half human and neither side will truly accept her." Kargha looked at her daughter, asleep in the improvised cradle Thomas had fashioned from blankets and sticks. I regret that the world is so cruel it cannot see past old hatreds long enough to welcome an innocent child. But I do not regret her. How could I? She is perfect. She is, Thomas agreed softly. But her life is going to be difficult, more difficult than if she had been born to parents of the same race. Perhaps, Kargha said, or perhaps she will be the bridge between worlds that neither of us could be. Perhaps children like her are the future if anyone is brave enough to let that future happen. She looked at Thomas. Do you regret helping me that night? Regret everything that has come from it? Never, Thomas said immediately. Even if we never make it to Rivermeet, even if we end up wandering the wilderness forever, I would still choose this. Choose you. Choose this family we have made. Kargha felt tears prick her eyes. She reached across the fire and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I choose this too. All of it. They sat like that, hands joined, until the fire burned down to embers and the stars wheeled overhead. Whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. Rivermeet, when they finally reached it in early autumn, was everything the rumors had promised and more. The settlement sprawled along both rivers, a mix of sturdy log buildings and canvas tents as new arrivals were still finding their places. The population was startlingly diverse. Humans and orcs, yes, but also a scattering of other races, all drawn by the promise of a fresh start. The settlement was governed by a council of 7, elected by the residents. 3 were human, 3 were orc, and 1 was a half-elf who served as tiebreaker and mediator. When Thomas and Kargha arrived and requested to settle, they were brought before this council for a standard interview. The questions were practical rather than judgmental. Could they work? What skills did they bring? Did they understand that Rivermeet's laws applied equally to all races, with harsh penalties for violence based on prejudice? Were they willing to contribute to the common defense and shared projects? Thomas and Kargha answered honestly. They were a family, they explained. Thomas had medical skills and farming experience. Kargha was a skilled hunter and tracker. They were willing to work hard and follow the settlement's laws. All they wanted was a safe place to raise their daughter. One of the Orc Council members, an older woman with scars crossing her weathered face, studied them for a long moment. A mixed family, she said. That takes courage in this world. Or stubbornness, Kargha replied with a slight smile. The Orc woman laughed, a sound like stones rolling. Stubbornness is a virtue here. You will need it. We have few problems within Rivermeet, but we are still not entirely accepted by either the human settlements to the south or the Orc territories to the east. Living here means accepting that both of your peoples may consider you traitors or worse. We have already been exiled or driven off by both sides, Thomas said. We have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The council conferred briefly, then the half-elf mediator spoke. Welcome to Rivermeet. You will be assigned a plot of land near the eastern edge of the settlement. It is raw land, not yet cleared, but it is fertile and has access to water. Build your home, establish yourselves, and you will find this settlement more accepting than the world you left behind. Relief flooded through Kargha so powerfully she had to blink back tears. Beside her, Thomas stood a little straighter, his hand finding hers and squeezing. They had made it. Against all odds, they had found a place where they could belong. The land they were assigned was indeed raw, thick with trees and undergrowth. But it backed onto one of the rivers and had good soil. Thomas and Kargha set up a tent while they worked on building something more permanent, and threw themselves into the work of creating a homestead. The community of Rivermeet proved welcoming in practical ways. Neighbors, both human and orc, came by to offer advice, loan tools, sometimes pitch in with heavy work. An orc family whose children were grown helped them clear the worst of the undergrowth. A human carpenter showed Thomas how to fell trees safely and mill them into lumber. Slowly, a cabin took shape. Macca grew and thrived. She took her first steps in front of their half-built cabin, stumbling from Kargha's arms into Thomas's waiting hands. She said her first words, calling Thomas Papa and Kargha Mama, without any understanding that this was unusual or wrong. The children of Rivermeet played together without regard for who was human and who was orc, and Macca fit right in with her mixed heritage. As the cabin neared completion and winter approached, Kargha realized she had been holding her breath for months, waiting for disaster. But disaster did not come. Instead, there was just life, hard work and small joys, shared meals and quiet evenings, the steady building of something real and lasting. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Thomas and Kargha stood outside their completed cabin. It was small but solid, with a good hearth and real windows and a door that locked. Inside, Macca was asleep in a proper bed, safe and warm. "We did it," Thomas said, his voice full of wonder. "We actually did it." "We did," Kargha agreed. She leaned against him, and his arm came around her shoulders automatically. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not closing your door. For carrying me inside your home instead. For choosing this difficult, complicated, beautiful life with me." Thomas turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face. His eyes were soft in the falling snow. "Kargha, you gave me back my purpose, my hope, a family I thought I would never have. I am the one who should be grateful." "Then we are both grateful," Kargha said with a smile. "And both stubborn enough to keep choosing this every day." "Every day," Thomas agreed. Then he kissed her, tender and deep, and the snow fell around them like a blessing. Inside the cabin, Macca stirred in her sleep and smiled, dreaming the untroubled dreams of a child who knew she was loved and safe. Outside, her parents held each other against the cold, two people from different worlds who had found a way to build a world of their own. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Thomas established himself as Rivermeet's primary healer, his skills earning him respect across all communities. Kargha became one of the settlement's best hunters, keeping the community supplied with game through the harsh winters. Macca grew into a bright, spirited child who moved effortlessly between the human and orc communities, accepted by both because she had never learned to see the divisions between them. Other mixed families arrived at Rivermeet, drawn by word that such a place existed. Some came from exile like Kargha. Others came seeking freedom to love without persecution. Each one added to the growing proof that humans and orcs could not only coexist, but thrive together when given the chance. Thomas and Kargha had two more children, a son who looked more human than orc, and a daughter who looked more orc than human. Both were welcomed by the community with the same easy acceptance that Macca had received. The children played together with the dozens of other younglings in Rivermeet, learning to speak both human common tongue and orc dialects, celebrating festivals from both cultures. On their 5th year in Rivermeet, the settlement held a formal ceremony to recognize partnerships. It was not marriage in the traditional human sense, or bonding in the traditional orc sense, but something new created for their unique community. Thomas and Kargha stood before the council and their neighbors, with Macca and their younger children at their sides, and pledged their lives to each other. "I pledge to stand with you through all seasons," Thomas said, his voice steady and sure. "To share joy and burden equally. To honor your strength and shelter your vulnerability. To build our future together, one day at a time." "I pledge to walk beside you on all paths," Kargha responded, her hand clasped in his. "To trust your wisdom and lend you mine. To defend what we have built and teach our children to do the same. To choose you every day for all my days." The community cheered. human voices and orc voices blending together in celebration. It was a sound that would have been impossible just years before, but here in Rivermeet, it was simply the way things were. That night, after the celebration ended and their children were finally asleep after all the excitement, Thomas and Kargha sat together on the porch of their cabin. The settlement spread out before them, lights glowing warm in the windows of homes where families of all kinds lived their lives. "Do you ever think about that night?" Kargha asked. "The storm, the healer's closed door." "Sometimes," Thomas admitted, "though it feels like a lifetime ago now. If he had opened the door, if he had helped me, we never would have met. Maka would have been born in that village and I would have moved on. You would still be in your cottage, alone." Thomas pulled her closer against his side. "Then I am grateful to Elric Thorn for being exactly the small-minded coward he was. His closed door led me to you." Kargha smiled. "Perhaps that is the lesson. That sometimes the cruelty of one person creates the opportunity for the kindness of another. That closed doors force us to find new paths. And sometimes those new paths lead somewhere better than we ever imagined," Thomas said. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above Rivermeet, each thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From desperate arrival to this peaceful evening, from two separate people to a family, from exile to a place they could call home. Inside the cabin, one of their children called out in sleep, and Thomas rose to check on them. Kargha watched him go, this man who had changed her life and the lives of so many others, by the simple act of refusing to close his door. She thought of all the families in Rivermeet who existed because someone, somewhere, had chosen mercy over fear. Change started small, she realized. One act of kindness. One door opened instead of closed. One stranger carried inside instead of left in the cold. From those small beginnings, entire communities could grow. Thomas returned and settled back beside her, and Kargha leaned her head on his shoulder. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, the endless tasks of maintaining a homestead and raising children. But tonight was for peace, for gratitude, for the simple joy of being together. "I love you," she said, the words still strange and wonderful in her mouth even after years of saying them. "I love you too," Thomas replied and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me carry you inside that night. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being the kind of man who would carry a stranger through a storm," Kargha said. "Thank you for seeing a person who needed help instead of a monster to fear." They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, and then they banked the fire and checked on each sleeping child before retiring to their own bed. As Kargha drifted off to sleep, Thomas's warmth solid beside her, she thought about the long road that had brought her here. The pain and fear and loss, yes, but also the unexpected joy, the family she had found, the love she had never imagined possible. A closed door had led to an open one. Rejection had led to acceptance. Exile had led to home. And in the morning, she would wake beside the man she loved, in the home they had built together, surrounded by children who would never know the hatred and division their parents had escaped. She would wake to a new day in Rivermeet, where humans and orcs worked side by side to build something better than the world they had left behind. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of challenge and reward. Maka grew into a young woman who inherited her mother's hunting skills and her father's healing knowledge, becoming a bridge between communities in ways even her parents had not imagined. She helped translate not just languages but understanding, explaining orc customs to confused humans and human traditions to puzzled orcs. Their son proved to have a gift for working with wood, creating furniture and tools that were sought after throughout the settlement. Their youngest daughter showed an early talent for music, learning both human instruments and orc drums, and her performances at festivals became a highlight of community gatherings. Thomas's medical practice grew to include an apprentice, a young orc woman who had been orphaned during the war and wanted to learn healing to prevent others from suffering similar loss. Kargha took on students as well, teaching hunting and tracking to anyone willing to learn, regardless of race. The settlement of Rivermeet grew from a collection of tents and rough cabins into a proper town. The council built a meeting hall, a school, a trading post. Merchants began to stop there on their routes between the human lands and orc territories, drawn by the opportunity to trade with both sides. Some came expecting hostility and were surprised by the cooperation they found. Word spread slowly but steadily that there was a place where the old hatreds did not rule. Not everyone approved, of course. There were incidents over the years. A group of human raiders who tried to attack what they called the mongrel settlement, only to be driven off by the combined defense of human and orc warriors fighting side by side. An orc war chief who demanded Rivermeet's orc residents return to traditional clan territories, only to be told firmly that they had found their home and would not leave it. A human noble who tried to buy Thomas's services exclusively for human patients, offering a small fortune, and was refused. Through each challenge, the community held together, stronger for its diversity rather than weakened by it. Thomas and Kargha's family became one of many examples of what was possible when people chose connection over division. On the 10th anniversary of their arrival in Rivermeet, the community held a celebration. It was part harvest festival, part commemoration of the settlement's founding, and part excuse to gather together and remember how far they had come. Thomas and Kargha stood at the edge of the celebration, watching their children dance with friends of every race, seeing neighbors of all kinds sharing food and stories. "I never thought I would see something like this," said a voice beside them. They turned to find the orc woman who had been on the council when they first arrived, now retired but still a respected elder. "In all my years, through all the war and hate, I never imagined a place like this could exist. But it does," Kargha said simply, "because people chose to make it exist." The elder nodded slowly. "Your family helped prove it was possible, that human and orc could not just tolerate each other but build a life together, love each other. Others saw you and thought if they can do it, perhaps we can too." "We were not the first," Thomas said. "There was an orc woman during the war who saved my life. She showed mercy when she could have shown hate. That is what started all of this, really. Then perhaps the lesson is that these acts of mercy ripple outward," the elder said. "One person saves another, that person helps someone else. Each act of kindness creates the possibility for more kindness. Over time, it adds up to something like this." She gestured to the celebration around them. "I hope so," Kargha said. "I hope Maka and her siblings carry that forward. That they teach their own children someday that the world does not have to be divided. That family and home can be built across any boundary if people are willing to try." The elder smiled, her scarred face creasing. "They will. I have watched them grow. They are good children becoming good adults. You should be proud." "We are," Thomas said, his hand finding Kargha's. "Every day we are." The elder moved on to greet other families, and Thomas and Kargha stood together watching their community celebrate. Maka was teaching a group of younger children a dance that combined human and orc steps. Their son was laughing with friends over some shared joke. Their youngest daughter was playing her drum while other musicians accompanied her. "You think we will ever tell them the whole story?" Kargha asked. "About that night in the storm, about how close we came to not existing as a family at all," Thomas considered. When they are older, perhaps. When they can understand how fortunate we are, how easily it could have gone differently. But I want them to grow up knowing that kindness and mercy are possible, not as exceptional acts, but as simply the way people should treat each other. That is a good world to give them, Kargha agreed. They stayed at the celebration until late into the night, dancing and eating and talking with neighbors who had become friends, friends who had become family. When they finally returned to their cabin with their exhausted but happy children, Kargha felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. She had been cast out by her clan, turned away by a healer, left to die in a storm. But a stranger had carried her inside instead, and from that single act of mercy had grown everything she now held dear. A husband who saw her as a person rather than a monster. Children who would never know the divisions their parents had overcome. A community that proved daily that another way was possible. As she settled into bed beside Thomas, Maka and the younger children already asleep in their rooms, Kargha thought about the long journey that had brought her here. Every hardship, every rejection, every moment of fear had been a step on the path to this life. She would not wish those trials on anyone, but she could not regret them either, because they had led her here. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. Thomas, already half asleep, stirred and pulled her closer. "For what? For everything. For carrying me through the storm. For building this life with me. For being exactly who you are. Always," Thomas murmured. "Every day for all our days." Kargha closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that when she woke, she would still be here in this home with this family, in this life they had built from mercy and stubbornness and love. The healer had shut his door, but a stranger had carried her inside instead. And from that choice, from that single act of seeing a person in need rather than an enemy to fear, had come everything that mattered. A family, a home, a future, a proof that the world could be better if people were brave enough to make it so. Outside the cabin, Rivermeat slept peacefully under the stars. Inside, a family that should not have been possible rested safely, living proof that sometimes mercy was not weakness but the strongest force in the world. That sometimes one open door could change everything. That sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we are born into. That sometimes strangers become the most important people in our lives. That love, real love, knows no boundaries except the ones we choose to build. And in Rivermeat, they had chosen to build no boundaries at all. Years turned into decades, and the story of Thomas and Kargha became one of the founding legends of Rivermeat. Children grew up hearing about the human who had carried a pregnant orc through a storm, about the family they had built, about the proof they had provided that different races could not just coexist but flourish together. Their cabin, carefully maintained, became something of a landmark, pointed out to newcomers as a reminder of the settlement's values. Maka eventually took a position on the council, the first child of a mixed marriage to do so. She used her unique perspective to help resolve disputes and welcome new families, always remembering the lessons her parents had taught her about mercy and stubborn kindness. Her siblings also found their places in the community, each contributing in their own way to the continuing experiment that was Rivermeat. Thomas and Kargha grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces marking the years with laugh lines and weather wrinkles. Thomas's hands, once so steady with a scalpel or setting bones, developed a tremor that forced him to fully retire from healing work. Kargha's joints ached on cold mornings, reminding her that even orc stamina had its limits. But they were together, and that made all the difference. They spent their later years passing on knowledge, Thomas training new healers, Kargha teaching hunting and wilderness skills. They became grandparents several times over as their children married and started their own families. Each grandchild was a small miracle, another generation that would grow up seeing mixed families as normal, seeing cooperation between races as the expected standard rather than the impossible exception. On their 50th anniversary of arriving in Rivermeet, the community held a celebration in their honor. Thomas and Kargha, both elderly now but still sharp-minded and strong-spirited, stood before the assembled crowd with their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren surrounding them. The current council head, a young human man who had been born in Rivermeet and never known any other way of life, spoke about what Thomas and Kargha represented. They showed us that family is not about blood or race, but about choice and commitment. That home is not a place you are born, but a place you build. That mercy is not weakness, but the foundation on which communities can be constructed. Rivermeet exists because people like Thomas and Kargha chose to believe in something better, and then did the hard work of making it real. Kargha, leaning on Thomas for support, looked out at the crowd. She saw humans and orcs standing side by side. She saw mixed families like her own, children of every shade and heritage playing together without thought. She saw the town that had grown from a collection of tents into a thriving community with schools and workshops and homes. "We did not do anything special," she said when asked to speak. Her voice was still strong despite her years. "We simply refused to accept the hate we were taught. We chose to see each other as people rather than enemies. Anyone can do that. Everyone should do that. And sometimes," Thomas added, his arm around Kargha's shoulders, "it starts with a simple choice, an open door instead of a closed one, a hand extended instead of a fist raised. One person deciding that mercy matters more than fear." The celebration went on around them, but Thomas and Kargha eventually slipped away, walking slowly back to their cabin. They did not need to be the center of attention. They had lived their lives according to their values, and the result was evident in the community that thrived around them. That evening, sitting on their porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun set over Rivermeet, Kargha reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. "You remember what I said that first night?" she asked. "When you were turning the baby." Thomas thought back across the decades. "You asked me why I was helping, and you told me about the orc woman who saved you during the war." Kargha took his hand, their fingers interlacing in a gesture worn smooth by years of practice. "I have thought about her so often. I wish I could tell her what came from her mercy, that she saved not just your life but all of this." She gestured to the town, to their family. "Perhaps she knows," Thomas said softly. "Perhaps somewhere in whatever comes after she can see what her choice created." How one act of compassion rippled forward through time. "I hope so," Kargha said. "And I hope that somewhere someone is making the same choice she did, choosing mercy over hate, opening a door instead of closing it, carrying a stranger inside instead of leaving them in the storm." "As long as people like that exist, there is hope," Thomas agreed. They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who had built a life from nothing but stubbornness and love, and the refusal to accept that their relationship was impossible. Around them, Rivermeet settled into its evening rhythms, lights appearing in windows, families gathering for dinner, the sounds of life continuing. Their own children and grandchildren would carry on what they had started, teaching the next generation and the one after that. The lesson would perpetuate, that mercy matters, that kindness creates ripples, that family and home can be built across any divide if people are willing to try. The healer had shut his door, but a stranger had carried her inside instead. And from that single choice, from that refusal to turn away someone in need, had come everything. A family that spanned two races. A community that proved cooperation was possible. A future where children of mixed heritage did not have to hide or apologize for existing. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything they had ever hoped for, and more than they had ever dared to dream. As full darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Thomas and Kargha went inside their cabin, closing the door against the night but never against those who might need help. Their door, like their hearts, remained open. It was a legacy they had passed to their children, and that their children would pass to theirs. That mercy was not weakness, that kindness cost nothing but created everything, that the world could be better if people simply chose to make it so. In the morning, Rivermeat would wake to another day of that better world. Humans and orcs would work side by side. Mixed families would go about their daily lives without fear. Children would play together, learning from each other, building friendships that crossed all the old boundaries. And in a small cabin that had become a symbol of everything Rivermeat stood for, Thomas and Kargha would wake beside each other, grateful for another day together. Another day in the life they had built from mercy and stubbornness and love. The storm that had brought them together was long past. But what had grown from that night of rain and desperation continued to flourish. A garden planted in kindness and tended with care. And that, in the end, was the only story that mattered, not the hate that had driven them from their original homes. Not the prejudice that had slammed doors in their faces, not the fear that could have kept them apart, but the mercy that had brought them together, and the love that had given them a future worth fighting for. One door had closed, but another had opened. And through that opening had come everything that made life worth living. That was the story Thomas and Kargha had lived. It was the story they had given to their children and grandchildren. It was the story that Rivermeat told itself, over and over, in 100 different ways. That mercy was stronger than hate, that love could cross any boundary, that family was what you built rather than what you were born into. And it was a true story, every word of it, proven daily in the life of a thriving community that should not have been possible but existed anyway, stubborn and beautiful and real. As Thomas and Kargha drifted off to sleep that night, their last conscious thoughts were of gratitude. For each other. For their family. For the community that had welcomed them. For the life they had built together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one open door at a time. The healer had shut his door, but Thomas Carver had carried Kargha inside his home instead. And from that moment, everything had changed. Everything had become possible. Everything had become real. And that was enough. That was everything. That was home.